Welcome to the Inclusive Spaces seminar series at the Bartlett, the Faculty of the Built Environment here at UCL. Today, you have joined the September edition of Inclusive Spaces. I'm Andrea Rigon, an Associate Professor at the Bartlett Development Planning Unit, and I'm joined by Joanna Dabash, a Bartlett alumna and founder of Catalytic Action Design Studio. This session will be recorded and added to the faculty YouTube channel, Bartlett EDI website, and forward to all registered attendees. And we encourage you to submit a question for us at any point during this lecture by clicking on the QA function at the bottom of the screen. You can submit your own question, or you can also look at other questions and upvote them. We will hear the presentation for the first half of the session and then begin the Q&A in the second half, and we will be ending by 2 p.m. Joanna, do you want to share the screen? Fantastic. So today we present our reflection on a participatory spatial intervention recently implemented as a collaboration between the Bartlett and Catalytic Action in the Lebanese town of Bar Elias. This piece of work also involved our colleague Hannah Bauman and was part of the project Public Services and Vulnerability in the Lebanese Context of Large-Scale Displacement that was funded by the British Academy and was led by Henrietta Moore. This work then fed into our more recent project funded by the Global Challenges Research Fund, which developed a handbook for the co-design of built interventions with children affected by displacement. And this handbook builds on the practical work of Catalytic Action, a charity and design studio founded by Bartlett alumni Joanna, as I mentioned, and Riccardo Luca Conti. The number of forced migrants is at a global record high. And whether they have been displaced internally or across a national border, they mostly settle in urban areas, where they represent a significant number that can quickly change urban dynamics, from labor and housing markets to infrastructures and services. And refugees often settle in the poorest parts of cities where rent and other living costs are lower. This means that they live side by side with the poorest local population. And these may generate tensions that build upon a number of other axes of differences, including religion, ethnicity, nationality, age, and gender. And this tension can be exacerbated if international aid is directed at displaced people, such as refugees, while vulnerable host communities are not supported to a similar degree. Therefore, we need an approach that is sensitive to different groups' needs and to the social spatial impact of identities. This first part of the talk reflects on the potential of a participatory methodology developed and tested in Bar Elias to show how participatory design can create spaces that address the needs of vulnerable groups from all backgrounds, and how the process of co-designing physical infrastructures can transform social relations and build a human infrastructure able to negotiate and activate change processes. And with the increasing protracted nature of displacement situation, humanitarian actors are rethinking the humanitarian development nexus in the attempt to shift from short-term emergency support to long-term development planning. And it is in this context that humanitarian interventions benefiting both host and refugees communities have the potential to change narratives of refugees as a burden, because their presence can help transform cities with new infrastructures for all and address the concern of a number of marginal groups. In part, to avoid these aid-induced tensions, the Lebanon Crisis Response Plan, for example, targets Syrian refugees and vulnerable members of the host Lebanese community equally. However, as identities play a key role in the use of these infrastructures, it is essential that they are planned, designed, and implemented in a manner that is sensitive to issues of diversity, and thereby ensures the benefits are enjoyed by the most vulnerable residents. And this is the challenge addressed by the participatory infrastructural design project discussed. Global forced displacement reached a new high with at least 82 million people. The duration of displacement is also increasing, with protracted refugee situation across the globe now lasting an average of 26 years, with 80% of refugees in a protracted situation. 60% of refugees and even a higher percentage of internally displaced people live in urban areas, often in the poorest cities, towns, and neighborhoods, living next to the most vulnerable host populations. And infrastructures have the capacity to address vulnerabilities or to create new ones. And in this lecture, we start from the basic meaning of infrastructures as the underlying foundation of a society. They play a role in shaping how people relate to the city and to each other, transforming social relations. This is even more important for infrastructures that enable social activities such as education and public space. Their design and accessibility may help create cohesion and justice, or foster exclusion and infrastructural violence. The distribution and functioning of infrastructures thus play a key role in producing spatial justice or injustice. Infrastructure interventions can create local employment, build local skills, and improve living conditions of both host and refugee communities. If fairly distributed, these economic benefits can contribute to social cohesion as local residents perceive a material benefit from the refugee presence. However, in their approach to infrastructures, most humanitarian agencies ignore important aspects of the design and implementation processes. Residents are a vital part of dynamic and functioning urban infrastructures and systems, and yet they are seldom involved in decisions about them in the global south. Another relevant dimension of infrastructures regards the important role of building a human infrastructure made of social relations and people's capacities that can facilitate collective decision-making. Such human infrastructure becomes all the more important in contexts characterized by conflict built on different dimensions of identities. We all have multiple identities, such as gender, class, race, and ethnicity, citizenship status, age, ability, and sexuality. And some of these identities are individual, and others are collective, and they are fluid and in constant change. And a fundamental way to understand how these identities shape different experiences, needs, and aspirations is the concept of intersectionality. That, with an oversimplification, is how the combination of multiple dimensions of identity creates unique experiences, especially of oppression and discriminations. And different aspects of individual and collective social identities play a crucial role in social processes, shaping life chances. The relationships between these different identities are intertwined with power. There are consolidated hierarchies and power relations amongst these identities, which make them relationals. This includes relation between, for example, men and women, Black and white people, etc. And it is these unequal relations between identities that contribute to inequalities and marginalization processes. And these identities and relationships, and this relationship between them, change in different contexts and over time, which means that they are socially constructed, and thus they can be socially deconstructed. Therefore, addressing these inequalities requires a relational, contextual, and intersectional approach, focused on transforming power relations that are at the core of social identities, making the recognition of diversity a political process. And these are the considerations that underpin the way our co-design process in Bar Elias was conceived, and which were directly addressed with participants throughout the process. Over to you, Joanna.
Thank you, Andrea. Lebanon is the country hosting the highest number of displaced per capita worldwide. Every fourth resident is a refugee. The participatory spatial intervention in Bar Elias sought to test novel ways in which refugees and host communities could work together to design and implement built interventions that would address their vulnerabilities and improve the well-being of all residents. Bar Elias is a town located halfway between Beirut and Damascus, respectively Lebanon's and Syria's capitals, and part of the Bekaa Valley, where most of the 1.5 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon live. The municipality of Bar Elias has welcomed displaced Syrians since the start of the Syrian civil war in 2011. Given the town's close proximity to the Syrian border, existing social and familial networks, and its majority Sunni religious affiliation. This influx had put pressure on public services. Bar Elias had witnessed rapid transformation in response to the needs of different communities living there, estimated to be 70,000 Lebanese, 7,000 Palestinian refugees, and between 31,000 and 45,000 displaced Syrians. The majority of refugee households in the Bekaa area live in non-permanent or non-residential shelters. Over 100 informal tented settlements where Syrians face substandard conditions with limited space have proliferated on agricultural fields and empty lots in Bar Elias. We recruited and trained a group of 7 citizen scientists that are women and men, Palestinian, Syrian, and Lebanese. After the Development Planning Unit Summer Lab workshop, the site for the participatory spatial intervention was identified. It is the entrance road to the town, which was the only place used by most Lebanese, Palestinian, and Syrian residents, as well as visitors. This road is characterized by the presence of many shops, services, including health centers and wide footpaths, making it an important social hub actively used at different times. The key activity to shape the intervention was a participatory design workshop. The citizen scientists learned how to research infrastructure needs and problems, as well as vulnerabilities of different people living in the town. Together, they developed the design brief that would address their needs and aspirations. We can see on this slide the different steps of this process, leading to the community-engaged construction and monitoring over 2 periods of time. The last monitoring was completed last week, which is 2 years after the intervention's implementation. Here are a few pictures of the process: the street observation, participatory mapping, design consultation, exhibition, interviews, discussions, and intersectionality training. The design is a series of small interventions, making the road accessible, child-friendly, and safe. In order to enhance communal recreation spaces for all, a shaded public seating area was proposed in a key location on the sidewalk. We transformed an unsafe sidewalk in front of a public clinic that used to be jammed with cars into a pedestrian-only sidewalk with a main seating and shading area, trees and floor games with playful features for children to play. Today, this space is considered to be the Seha, or the square of the town, where people meet and call for gathering. We also worked on accessibility. The sidewalks along this road are very high. We incorporated access ramps to the sidewalks, allowing persons on wheelchairs, mothers with trolleys, and elderly to use the road and access it easily. Pollution and waste are key issues highlighted by the locals. With a small project, we couldn't solve such big issues in full, but we raised awareness on the importance of recycling. For instance, here is a shade made of wasted plastic collected and prepared by the participants.
Researching power relations can be problematic, as these identities are socially constructed, and eliciting discussion of these divisions contributes to validating them. Therefore, it is better to observe how they emerge empirically in social interaction, without starting from preconceived ideas of the relevance of specific identities over others. A diversity-sensitive participatory design interventions offers a privileged observation point to explore these relations through practice and to face the related challenges. For example, one resident of Bar Elias refused to have an access ramp built on the pavement in front of his building. Despite municipal approval and the fact that the intervention was on public space, the municipality could not challenge the power this man asserted. And an infrastructure like the planned set of disability ramps loses a lot of its utility if the accessible path is interrupted by a missing ramp. And therefore, the power of one man can undermine a collective effort. We also found that there was much less hostility towards Syrians compared to what is generally assumed in policy literature. But we found that the dynamics of spatial segregation had limited interaction between hosts and Syrians, thus reducing reciprocal trust. There are two intertwined ways through which the intervention transforms social relations: through the impact of the physical interventions and through the social process of co-design itself. Many efforts were made to create an environment where all felt able to participate. The design workshop and the overall process created a disruptive space of freedom for participants, as well as a process of personal transformation in which, for the first time, Lebanese, Syrians, and Palestinians of different ages, groups, genders, education level, and class were able to work together as equals. And the group also became aware of unequal gender relations in their attempt to gather data. And gender equality was advanced through insurgent practice. The municipality, for example, had explicitly said that they would not accept any project directly aiming at changing gender relations. And some women would not normally have been permitted to take part in such a process, but the involvement of two well-recognized universities allowed the work to be framed as educational, helping legitimize their participation to their fathers or husbands. A woman really revealed that for the first time, she felt she was not just a mother. The project also hired women in the construction process, disrupting the sector dominated by men. And the empowerment also came because the two architects who facilitate most of the process, including Joanna, were two Lebanese women who publicly negotiated with the male mayor and other male directors at the municipality, as well as managing and paying male contractors on site. And for some Syrians, the process allowed them to become part of the town by contributing to shaping it, and to some extent exercising agency and urban citizenship. And this creating a feeling of inclusion, but it was also a means for them to reciprocate for the hospitality they had received. Participants realized that interventions for the most vulnerable can also significantly benefit less vulnerable groups, thus being win-win solutions. One of the ways to deal with internal conflicts or different priorities between different groups and individuals was to explicitly focus on the most vulnerable. As everyone agreed, it was important the intervention benefit those individuals first. The physical intervention converted a public space into a social space, breaking barriers across nationality, gender, and age. And the interventions also contributed to changing the narrative from refugees as a burden to refugees as residents who are helping transform Bar Elias from a small town into a city. Unexpectedly, the intervention catalyzed complementary action from others, which amplified the impact and the scale of the intervention, which had very limited funding. The municipalities sent their machinery to support the construction process and provided workers to clear the rubble in the park, as well as water containers to water the new plants and trees. It drilled the water well in the park for irrigation and agreed to take responsibility for maintaining the garden. Another interesting aspect was that in October 2019, Lebanon faced a wave of unprecedented protests that rapidly spread across the country. And the infrastructure created through this participatory intervention became the focal point for the protests in Bar Elias, as you can see in the picture. The participatory process had built the infrastructure that enabled the revolution in Bar Elias. The process of creating the intervention built a human infrastructure made up of residents of the city from different identities who are able to participate in and initiate city-making processes that take into account and analyze the diversity of residents' needs and aspiration. This is a network of people and capacities that operates for the city beyond sectarian divisions and other dimensions of segregations. The experience of Bar Elias shows that combining action research, citizen science, participatory design, and the diversity lens not only contributes to the design of infrastructures that respond to residents' needs, but that it can transform social relations and build a human infrastructure able to negotiate and activate important change processes while diffusing social tensions. And such an approach is especially important in unequal and conflictual settings, where a relational, contextual, and intersectional approach can reveal the complexities of power relations and inequalities. And it can create an urban citizenship, a participatory citizenship born out of the community building element of participatory design. And such citizenship is able to reduce social tensions and build new solidarities between different groups while constructively engaging with authorities. And actually, we have published this reflection in this new book, Inclusive Urban Development in the Global South, which focused on issues of intersectionality and diversity and has been published by Routledge. And we also made, and more specifically, a couple of documentaries that go in the details of the methodologies, as well as a report on the participatory spatial intervention with lots of information about the whole methodological process, and they are both available in Arabic and English. And while the core of the participants of this specific intervention were adults, actually catalytic action has focused over the years on the 40% of displaced people who are children. And actually reflecting on catalytic action practice, we developed an extensive research project, DECIDE. And the main output of this project is a handbook for the co-design of built interventions with children affected by displacement, and that has been informed by more than 1,500 children, and has been published with 2 UN agencies, UN Habitat and UNICEF. And we'd like to show you a very quick animation to introduce the project, and then we end on talking a little bit about this project.
Global forced displacement is at a record high. Displaced populations often live in precarious conditions next to vulnerable host communities. Over 40% of displaced people are children. Their access to safe spaces to learn and play is limited. This can be detrimental to their healthy development and overall well-being. Building additional social infrastructure for children, such as schools and playgrounds, might be the obvious solution. But in order to truly improve the well-being of children affected by displacement, it is crucial that they participate in all phases of the design and implementation of built projects. This can empower children, boost the local economy, build positive relationships between displaced people and their hosts, and result in better infrastructure for the children and their communities. How can children participate in the design of built projects? Through 4 simple steps. 1. Put children and their carers at the center of developing ideas for the project. This requires strong partnerships that consider the specific needs of children affected by displacement. 2. Translate children's ideas into design solutions, taking into account the diversity of children and their experiences, context, and location. 3. Use local materials and contractors, ensuring that children and laborers are protected along the entire supply chain. And 4. Work with children to decide how to use the space after construction. This allows them to take ownership of the space and contributes to its sustainability. DCID has developed a practical toolkit for the participation of children in built environment projects. It acts as a bridge between professionals of participatory design and forced displacement in an urban context, and it recognizes the importance of the quality of space on play and child development.
Over to you, Joanna.
Thank you, Andrea. So despite the multiple positive impacts, it was observed that there is an undersupply of such interventions. And we looked into this and concluded that this is mostly happening because such interventions require professionals from different fields of specialty to work together, and often organizational structures do not make these collaborations easy. Their additional value is difficult to measure, especially on the long term. They require a larger initial investment compared to the funds required only for the built product. And lastly, these interventions often present multiple operational challenges, including some linked to safeguarding. The handbook addresses these challenges by providing to all actors involved a comprehensive understanding of the entire process and practical guidelines and tools. It is divided in 3 parts. Part A is about designing with children. Part B talks about procurement and building. And Part C is about post-building impact and sustainability. As I mentioned, we wanted this handbook to be very practical, which is why we also included a number of step-by-step tools and templates that practitioners will be able to download and use to engage with children in co-design activities. In addition to this, throughout the handbook, we present many examples of projects or simply scenarios and stories from real projects. This was done to keep things as practical as possible, even when explaining more theoretical concepts. Moving to the handbook contents in a bit more details. Part A, Designing with Children, is obviously the core section of the handbook. It is important to mention that for us, design refers to the entire process linked to a built intervention, starting in many cases with an idea and leading to a built product. This understanding is different from other approaches that limit design to the act of drawing a space. So when we say design with children, we also mean engage the children in generating an idea, building a partnership, discussing funding, researching needs, and so on. Some of the key messages from Part A are: children must be at the center of the co-design process. The process of designing spaces with children requires careful planning, including the preparation of tools appropriate to the context and to the participant. Children should be engaged through playful and fun activities, and good facilitation is key for successful participatory engagement. Also, when working with children in vulnerable contexts, the design choices that are linked with the selection of building materials have a major impact. For example, if we are building a school in a refugee settlement and we select building materials available locally and we purchase them from small businesses run by the parents of the children who will be attending the school, this will have indirectly an impact on children's well-being as the project is supporting their family. Equally, we can generate the same impact when we hire local labor. In this case, we had fathers and mothers of the children who will later be attending the school, joining us on the construction site. Part B, procurement and building. This part is a bit more technical, but it is really important. And in fact, many participants found the topics presented here to be a major barrier to the implementation of co-designed built interventions within their organizations. Even if we engage children in coming up with ideas and developing solutions, then those solutions need to be built. And due to the nature of this work and what I just explained about generating impact and empowerment also during the construction process, it becomes fundamental to also pay attention to this phase. For example, we have a responsibility to ensure the health and safety of the people who build these spaces, which in many cases are the parents of the children we are working with. But also, if you want to deliver innovative design solutions that are durable, built with local materials and skills, then we must develop ways to engage with procurement, not just as a boring bureaucratic step of the process, but as an important one. Only by approaching procurement differently and by placing children's well-being at the center of it, we would be able to implement innovative solutions such as the widest slide in Lebanon, which was the result of a collaboration with multiple providers. And that was a direct answer to what kids wanted. And I quote, "A slide large enough so I can play with my friends." And lastly, part C, post-building impact and sustainability. What we present in this section is that it is important to also think about how can we maximize the impact of a built intervention. For example, in this playground, we decided to maximize impact by setting up a basketball training for the children. And the key question here is, how can we work with children to get the most out of the implemented spaces? And this collaboration with children that started with coming up with an idea, then continues to developing design solutions, building, now extends to the post-building. Those projects that manage to get this comprehensive engagement are those that generate a very strong sense of ownership towards the space, and of course, they empower children. The last section of this toolkit speaks about impact, and the key message here is really to realize how such co-design processes have an impact that goes beyond the physical product, and that is much more linked to the participatory process, which I presented here today. The handbook is also available in Spanish and Arabic, and we provide training to organizations involved in these projects. Please do get in touch, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Joanna. And now we start the Q&A. So please post more questions if you have. And just to say, you can download the handbook from the website of the project, decide.co.uk. decide.co.uk, and decide DEDID.co.uk. Okay, so I think the first question is a good question for Joanna from Bulelani Mkolweni. He or she is writing, I see that most of the research process took place during COVID-19. What impact did COVID-19 have on the process? Did you have to adjust, change anything?
Yes, definitely. We had to change and adjust the methodology and how we engage key stakeholders and participants in this participatory process. So for example, for the DCID project, we had planned to do face-to-face workshops with the practitioners, and we had to change, it was during the start of COVID. So we had to adapt really quickly and try to understand how we can try to get the same engagement, the same input. And we hosted like collective discussions, one-to-one online interviews, So we had to really adapt quickly. And when we speak about face-to-face participation with children, we also adjusted this in our recent projects. For example, we tried to follow like social distancing, ensure like to have a lower number of children engaged and to have an open space, use mask, sanitize. So we had to learn and really adjust quickly to still have like a good participation and a valuable participation. Thank you.
Okay, and then maybe I'm gonna take the two related questions from Ana Cristina Benalcanzar, and the first one is how do you address sensitive intersectionality to participants and make them internalize? And the second one is, do you explore a methodology in which you train the participants to keep monitoring data, like you understand how to scale or replicate in other places by themselves? And maybe try to be brief, but this is really about having a long-term commitment with a group of people that works with us as citizen scientists, as local researcher, ideally over a number of years and in multiple projects. And there is a process of really, for example, understanding issues, complex issue of intersectionality and how they play out in space is about, for example, even with other residents, showing lots of examples from other cities and other places with other problems that are taking place there. And so we don't suggest what are the problems or the issues, the intersectionality issue that plays out in the area where they live, but by looking at other examples from so many other countries and places, they then see how those relates to themselves and they start conversation about it. And then they go out and have this conversation. So we don't come and say, oh, look, the important issue here is how religion and gender and nationality intersect with each other, and this is how segregation is created. No, that for us would actually emphasize, create even more problems if someone coming from outside actually validate those divisions. But it's about how this conversation emerge between people and how this can be led through a very a process where everyone feel comfortable, and through this learning things you know, things proceed in this kind of ways. And again, on the monitoring and everything, yes, people have been trained into methodologies. They go, they collect data, they show with us, we then share them back to them. And it's really this iterative process of becoming researchers of their own reality. And this has generated a lot of spin-off that haven't to do with us. So some young people said, we have now this capacity, we got to know other people, we are gonna probably run at the next municipal elections because we are unsatisfied by how the municipality is managing things. And now we have the confidence and the knowledge to do that. Others said, oh, we have used that same process and exercise and conversation with our students groups at university for doing this and that. And so many other people have said, okay, I'm talking with my neighbors and we want to do a similar initiative in an empty space within our space. So the good thing about creating these capacities and this relationship, what we call these human infrastructures, is that then the impact that it has is unpredictable and generates lots of different things in different ways. Okay. Yeah, so we have answered this from Anna Christine. So from Ava Pevsner, how do you find the balance between needs and asset-based approaches? How do you make sure that communities are getting the help they need without reveling in what a community lacks? And how you ensure that their culture, identity, history is protected, enhanced, or allowed to flourish through design? So I'm gonna say just one sentence, and I think then Joanna can respond more on the design bit. But just to say, for example, this project, most of the staff is Lebanese staff who knows the area incredibly well, has been working there for a lot of time. And the whole process is not by going there and say, you know, there's a gap, there is a lack here, but it's about starting a process altogether where then people in this case have identified the number of vulnerabilities in their context And then they have identified a number of strengths and solutions that they could bring about. And then they thought about how then we can see these in the space. And I leave it to Joanna now a bit more speaking about this element of design, culture, ethnicity, etc.
Yeah, actually, what you said, Andrea, it's a process. And even when we design, it's a co-design process. So the ideas don't come from us. It comes from the people. They suggest like what could address their needs, what could address these vulnerabilities that they just researched and that they highlighted within their own communities. And we try to follow a very sensitive design process that is sensitive to the context. So for us, knowing the context and knowing the people and understanding the culture, understanding the value is very important in order to come up with a design that is that responds to this context. So we don't come with our preconceived ideas of what would work here. In fact, in all our design projects, we always start by understanding the context very carefully. When we're working with the children, we try to understand the children, the specific children, their diversity as well, and try to develop the methodology according to this. So this is a way to deal with that. And also the fact that Catalytic Action Team is formed of team members that are locally based, and the fact that we work with local researchers / citizen scientists that are from the community itself. This is very important to ensure that we are responding to this sensitivity that you mentioned. I hope I answered that.
We have another question from Bule Lani on the ethics. So maybe it is for you, Joanna. I like the idea of having children as full participants in processes and creations that directly impact or involve them. Are there any ethical issues to deal with in this regard?
Yeah, mainly the key problem here is more than ethical is on safeguarding, which was also highlighted in the toolkit. Because working with children, you need to be very careful. You need to ensure that you have the consent of their parents. You need to ensure that you are really not like trying to affect the children's lives in any way negatively. So we are really careful about the data we collect, about how we engage the children, training the facilitators who engage the children. So it obviously comes with a lot of careful considerations that we also discuss in the handbook. So you can find a lot more information on this bit in the handbook itself.
And then we have a question from Anisa Indrarini, yeah. Do you think it's possible to create a fully, completely inclusive space? How much do you think the importance of physical design of a space for it to be able to include people with different backgrounds, not only gender, age, disability, but maybe particularly their ethnicity, and making sure that it could increase their sense of belonging in the new setting? And I think this is quite an interesting one in the sense that for my main answer, and the answer that we in jointly work with the Catalytic Action, is that you can't create an inclusive space unless you have a deeply participatory process. So again, the design of the physical space is part of a design, very detailed design brief that is being created by residents, and multiple iteration of this design explained to people and brought back to the designing board, but also people that have to gain a certain spatial awareness, spatial literacy in order to be able to provide this spatial design. So it's really about capacity building of residents in order to then be able to make spatial decisions. And this requires a quite long process, but then yes, it can have that inclusion of different ethnicity. In this case, that was a main point, including different nationalities that in a city that was incredibly segregated. And maybe for Joanna, a question from Haimin Park. How can such participatory design measures be more economical and timely what would be some ways to increase participation in urban design without a hands-on intervention by the inhabitants?
Yeah, this is a very good question, because sometimes the co-design process is mainly challenged by how the partners don't want to, you know, spend more time, and they just want to see the built product. So what we do is we always work with whatever the fund is available. If we have strictly to do like a built product, so we develop the participatory design phase according to this. And in the case of the Bareliès participatory spatial intervention, what really worked to make this a longer process is to collaborate with the university to make this into a longer and more comprehensive participation. So to make it more economical, I think it depends, like there's no one answer, like it depends on the project itself and the timeline of the project and what do you want to achieve. And I can't see the question anymore, Andrea. So
yeah, I think you gave a good answer. Perhaps I have another one for you. So from Maria Adriana Gebor Munoz, how was the participation of the adults in the process? I think this refers more to the second project. Help them to accept what the children propose. So more in the practice work with children.
Yeah, that is very, very important, because engaging children is not only about engaging children alone, but also engaging their caregivers, including their parents, sometimes their sisters or their grandparents. And this is very important. And one of the key aims of engaging children is for also the community to value their input, to value their ideas, and to start seeing children as active agents, that their ideas matter, because at the end, they are the ones who are experts of their lives more than the adults. So these spaces are created with the children and by the children. And this is when they see us as practitioners working with the children and listening to them. This is also a very important phase to step to reach greater positive impacts from these projects. And we sometimes create activities that include together the caregiver and the children in the same session. And they, through the dynamic of these sessions, this can be achieved.
Ayadi is asking, often as architects, we want to build. How can we make spaces inclusive without necessarily building? Maybe just to say that lots of the work that Catalytic Action does and in these projects is really about building, bringing children, bringing families and people to spaces in activities to own those spaces, because most of the spaces where refugees play are not spaces that are built for children or children's spaces, but they kind of occupy them. And sometimes it's about making this space a little bit safer, or maybe getting everyone else accepting that those spaces are for children. And sometimes you don't need to build a lot. You will be surprised how little we built. Even in the big intervention in Bareliès, is really about lots of little tweaking the space, understanding how people use the space, and involving lots of people. Do you want to add something on that, Joanna?
No, I think you said it all, because for us, it's not about the built product alone, but it's more the process that leads to the built product. So the process is what makes these spaces inclusive. So it doesn't only matter on the build, but obviously building it and then building this intervention and then monitoring its use and then seeing that we were able to achieve these impacts afterwards is very important as well.
Okay, and then we have a question from Luke Turner. How did you discount, prioritize, or select the best ideas where many are proposed in co-designing?
Yeah.
And I don't know if we want to speak about Bareliès, for example, Joanna.
Yeah, actually, translating ideas into design solution is a very important phase. And the way we usually do it is that we have an open, transparent conversation from the beginning on what we could achieve and what we might not, especially limited by budget specification in most cases. So, for example, I give an example that we always have with children when we do these activities. Of course, they always suggest, in most cases, I would say like a swimming pool. And most of the budgets we have were like small and we couldn't implement a swimming pool. So these kind of conversations come from the beginning, from the participatory assessment phase, and we don't, we try not to raise high expectation and tell them exactly like we discussed the budget. As I said, when presenting the DSID, we say like we might not be able to implement everything because of budget restrictions. So even in Bareliès, for example, they were suggesting having like a digital screen at the main entrance road of Bareliès where we can show like the name of the town and some characteristics, what's happening this week, but also, you know, like a notice board. And during the workshop, we discussed that probably we won't be able to do this. But what was really interesting is that we weren't able to do this, and it was through conversation that we decided that. And then a few months after, the municipality itself created like a cement entrance gate having the name of the town at the beginning of the road. So this also like was really interesting. So even if we didn't do it, the municipality then did it in a different way. So yeah, just wanted to give that example.
So I would like at this point to thank you all. We received many more questions that we could answer. We still have 13 questions pending, but we will be really glad to address those in writing. So please do email us and we will get back to you with those answers. Also, some of those answers, I've skimming through the questions, are in the most extensive stuff that we have been writing about both works and projects. So do check the DSID website, dsid.co.uk. The full handbook is there in English, and very soon it will be uploaded in Spanish and Arabic. There are documentaries that even give you a visual imaging of how we work with people of different things. There is a report about the work in Bareliès with details of the methodologies, how we created that spatial literacy that some of you is asking, and all those details. So absolutely do, if you are interested and want to know more, do get in touch. We always love to hear, build collaboration, answer questions. So please reach out to those links and to those publication and materials. And also we have reflected much more in depth on this project and other interesting projects in the book, Inclusive Urban Development in the Global South, Intersectionality, Inequalities and Community by Routledge. So do get those resources, and I really want to thank you all for this, and particularly want to thank all the team at the Bartlett for setting up these events, in particular Nishat and Steve, and everyone else who have been part of the project. We mentioned Hannah Baumann, we mentioned Riccardo Conti, but many others have helped us in the project, and you'll find all the names in the full publications that are there. So once again, thank you so much. Get in touch, email us with your question, and we'll be happy to answer more of those.